Hello and welcome or welcome back. I'm Nicole, a cottage witch, and this is my week in tarot books and art. I've been in a bookish haze this week, reading kind of obsessively many things, and I have very little inclination to come out of this haze, but I will for at least long enough to make this video, and then I will leave again. This week, this arrived. This is the Wandering Spirit Moonlit Path Tarot. Very silvery. It's the form of a skeleton and a girl as symbols of depression and empathy to provide to provide you with comfort even in the hardest of times. Hae-Nui Shin has apparently written a book, Their Story You Don't Know, with these two characters, which I might have to read now. Somehow I didn't realize it was a book, but I saw this on Kickstarter and loved it. And that is the book. It's very, I don't know what this kind of silver gilding is, but it's sort of, there you can see the different colors. I like it. It's very satisfying. Anyway, it's also very dramatic. But I'm okay with that in this case. So that's what I've used so far this week, because, you know, fun with mental health, as happens. So I had that. I had, what else did I have out? When Olga Speaks, I have out, which is the, this oracle deck that's, is it gonna focus? Maybe. It's really beautiful, and they go very nicely together, but also very dramatic. I've had this out most of the winter, just sort of hanging out on my shelf, and decided to use it again yesterday, and I really love it. And then the other one that I got this winter that I've only started to use this week is this, the Runes and Roots Oracle, which is this one, which is the boxes. Annoying as I'll get out because it's too small for the book, so things get stuck in the box, which is delightful. Anyway, it's Plants and Runes. This is a binder, obviously. So is that. Here's Gibu with Orchid. And I have made my own rune deck, but I thought this would be Ilhaz Angelica. That's quite interesting. I thought it would be interesting to try this one. St. John, yeah, that works. St. John's worked with this one. So I've used this like a couple of times. I'm not very familiar with it. Fig Tree. I don't know fig trees very well. Mugwort. Yeah, okay. So I have to practice with that one a little bit more, I think, but so far I like it, I think, except for the box, which is too snug. Okay, books. Oh, Lord. So I finished, after about almost a year, Ulysses by James Joyce. I've read this twice and bits, because I've gone through a podcast a couple of times. It's a ridiculous amount of work and exhausting and overwhelming, but it's also really rewarding. There are a lot of literary references, not all of which I got. I didn't get all of the Irish history because I just don't know all of that. There are a lot of biblical references, some of which I got, and a lot of blasphemy, which is one of the reasons they tried to get it banned. It is overwhelming. It is also very pretentious. I'm not saying it's not. He was a pretentious author. But one of my favorite things about it, the joy I think in it, is the expansiveness in other people's minds. You really, with stream of consciousness, you get into other people's heads in a way that you don't in other styles of writing. So those parts that were stream of consciousness were my favorite. There were a couple chapters I didn't love. The one that's written like a play I didn't love. And the one that goes through apparently the entire history of the English language, bizarrely, I didn't love. Most of it sounded like gibberish, so that was lost on me. But the the chapters where you spend time really just inside other people's heads were the most fun. Then I've done a lot of read around the world stuff this week. Co-Wives, Co-Widows by Adrienne Yabusa is from Central African Republic. It was, I think, originally written in French and translated. And it was not at all what I expected it to be. These two women, I don't know, there's just certain Western assumptions about being co-wives and the experience that must be. Anyway, I quite liked the two women. I'm not sure I'd ever reread this book, but they were Ndongo Passy and Greg Pubu, I can't pronounce that very well, are the two widows. And after their husband's sudden and unexplained death, they find themselves fighting tooth and nail for all that is important to them. And actually, I really liked it. Learned more about the Central African Republic, which is kind of the point of this read around the world situation. I've read books from Mexico before, but I'd never read Pedro Paramo. I don't know how you, can't speak Spanish. Sorry. By Juan Rulfo, which is phenomenal. I loved this book so much. So I'm in a book club. Sorry, my eyes are having trouble focusing today, which is giving me a bit of a headache, which is really fun and not at all disconcerting. I'm in a book club reading 100 Years of Solitude. And this author, apparently, Juan Rulfo, was really influential to Gabriel Garcia Marquez, who wrote the foreword to this one. And you can really tell. The whole premise of this book is a man going to find his father in this town that his mom had left when she was younger, and either pregnant with him or he was a young boy. So he doesn't know his father, and he doesn't know all the people in the town that he meets, but he's heard stories from his mother about some of these people. And the boundary between life and death is really fuzzy. You can't always immediately tell who's alive and who is a ghost. And I loved it. It was so much fun, and you can really tell how it influenced Marquez. Then I just finished, just before filming this, Lolita. I reread. This book is falling to pieces, but I listened to the audiobook. It is disturbing as all get out. The writing is gorgeous, but the subject matter is creepy. And it's that contradiction that I find fascinating. It's been, I don't know, maybe 20 years since I've read it, so it's been a while. There were a few things I didn't notice before, like Annabelle Lee was his first love when he was a child. And that's obviously from Poe. There was another bit of poetry that he read that sounded like Poe, but I don't know if it was, but it reminded me of him. Anyway, I want to reread Crime and Punishment as well this year, and it is fascinating to live inside somebody else's head, and if they're really different from you and criminal, then it's just weird and disturbing as well, but fascinating. And one of the things I noticed in rereading this was he knew what he was doing was wrong. He knew society thought what he was doing was wrong, but he also knew it was hurting her, even when he denied that it was hurting her. She also doesn't really get a voice at all. Like, she speaks in the book, but it's always filtered through how he perceives her, which is to say, and he admits this right near the end, so spoiler alert, that he didn't know her. He didn't know how she thought. And he didn't really at any point care to know her as an actual human. She was, I think, 12 at the beginning and 17 by the end. And she doesn't get a voice at all in the book. She speaks, but it's his perception. It's all filtered through how he sees her. So you don't really know her at any point. And in the front of this book, there's a quote by somebody I don't know, Lionel Trillian, I don't know who that is, who says this book is about love. And I'm vehemently disagree with that. It's a phenomenal book, but it's not a love story. This is not love. This is revolting. The writing is beautiful, but the content is disgusting. And even by the end, so skip this if you don't want spoilers or anything. You can tell by how she turned out by the time she was 17 that she is not okay. You, like, as an outsider, even though it's through his eyes, you know she's not okay, and he knows she's not okay. And he just never acknowledges her as a human being, really. Like, she's not, what's going on inside her head doesn't matter to him at all. Even though he claims to love her, it's not really love, and anybody who confuses it with love is a walking red flag. And then I listened to a bunch of audiobooks, kind of obsessively, just for hours and hours without stopping. So I've got, this is my notes section. I listened to Clarice Lispector for the first time. I'd never read her books before. She's a Brazilian author, and I wanted to read another Brazilian author because I'd read, what's his name? Paulo Coelho, and didn't like him. I don't think he's a good writer. Sorry if you like him. So I wanted to read Lispector. Also, the books that I'd read by him, The Alchemist and The Witch of Portobello, aren't set in Brazil. And I wanted to read something more Brazilian. And I mean, this one is set in a maid's room and a closet. So I don't know, is it in Brazil? Possibly. But there's one line in the book that really describes my experience of the book, which is falling into a well horizontally. It's a little bit Virginia Woolf and a little bit Franz Kafka. So I'm not really sure I understood what she was saying all of the time, but it was fascinating. I might have to reread it. It was really, really interesting. I read, finally, this is a month for people like Borges that why did I never read Borges? I knew I would like Borges. I'd never read him. Why? I don't know. Anyway, he's Argentinian, was. So I listened to The Labyrinths, or just Labyrinths, I think it's called. The first 2/3 or so are short stories, which are weird and amazing. And the last third or so is essays. And I just love the way, sometimes you read a book and you're like, I like the way this person's mind works. And I knew I would like him. And why it took me until I was 40 to read him, I don't know. That's a mystery. But I will read some more of him. I know he's got a lot of short stories and more essays and things, and so I'll get some more books at some point and spend some more time. And I think some of them I need to reread because they are a bit strange. And sometimes that makes them a bit hard to follow on the first read, I think. So I think I'll need to spend some more time with them. There was an author from Armenia. I think she was from Armenia. Narine Abgarian. I think she writes in Russian, but she's Armenian. And I think she's won a Russian literary award. Anyway, the book is called Three Apples Fell from the Sky, and it is delightful. The woman who is the main character, whose name I'm blanking on at the moment because I'm abysmal at names, is wonderful. I love her. She's a little weird. She's a bit quirky. There is maybe a hint of magic realism in it sometimes, but sometimes it's just weird assumptions that are weird, I don't know, ways of thinking that people have. That maybe not magic realism, that's just patterns of thinking that are a bit magical. Anyway, the author was clearly influenced, but also by 100 Years of Solitude, because she fits that phrase into this book. And the town of, I think it's called Moran, is at least partially, apparently inspired by Macondo. I'd read that just from what people said in English that she had said in Russian interviews. So I'm taking translators' words for us, random internet people, because I don't understand Russian. But you can kind of see a relationship between her world and the world of Marquez. I also read from Bulgaria. This is the first book I read from Bulgaria by Georgi Gospodinov. Gospodinov? I will read more of him. I love this book. So I read The Physics of Sorrow, and his playfulness with language is my favorite thing. I love it so much. This was one of his shorter books. I think there's something time, I can't remember what it's called. It's his most famous book, I think. It's got the word time in it. That's not very helpful. And I really want to read that one. I want to read his other book too. I love the way he plays with language, and the structure is brilliant as well. It starts out with Bulgarian takes on Greek myths, which, I mean, they must have some relationship with Greek myths. They're right next door to Greece. There has to be some, the borders weren't always what they are now. And the structure of the novel is very much related to the labyrinth that the Minotaur is trapped in, condemned to, whatever. It's brilliant. I loved it. I'll reread it someday, and I'll read his other books. He's definitely gone on my list of authors to read much more of. I read Gail Fay has a book called Small Country, Petite Bay. I think it was originally written in French. He's from, so I counted this towards Burundi. He is born in Burundi. His mom was Rwandan and his dad was French. And then I think by 13, he ended up in France. And then he's written a book that's set partly in Rwanda and partly in Burundi. So I had to look up a little bit of the history of these countries because I'd read about the genocide and the war in the Congo after the genocide, but I hadn't really read much about, any book about genocide has a little sort of preamble about colonization because that so strongly impacted how the genocide turned out, and the French and the Belgians in the Congo had manipulated historical prejudices so severely to control people. But I didn't really know the difference between Rwanda and Burundi, and they have been separate countries for hundreds of years, but they're also really closely related. Their languages are mutually intelligible. It made me think when I was reading about it, about Norway and Sweden, where they can kind of understand each other. They're different countries, they have different histories, but they have a lot of shared history too, and a lot in common, probably more in common than not. But at the same time, they're still their own countries with their own national identities. So it reminded me a little bit of that, sort of in how similar they are, even though they're different countries. It was really interesting, and people would go back and forth, and people escaped Rwanda, went to live in Burundi, and then had to escape the civil war in Burundi, which I didn't know very much about, so that was very interesting to learn about as well. It is a fiction story. It starts with, the narrator is an adult from France going back to visit family in Rwanda and Burundi, and there are, nearish the beginning, a couple of kids running around. I think they're somebody's cousin's kids or something. And they're just, getting into mischief, as young boys will do. And I felt like that was the perfect way to start because there's so much suffering later between the genocide and the Civil War that starting with kids just goofing off and then ending up with bloodbaths, and not a lot of violence is actually depicted, but you get a lot of the psychological impact of violence on people. And you do see some of the kids who become child soldiers, manipulated by the sort of propaganda and everybody's hatred and fears. A lot of the people doing the manipulating really played on people's fear so strongly, which always seems to happen. I mean, it's happening right now in Israel and the United States, and a lot of people are dying because of it. So that's not a new phenomenon, and it's certainly not unique to Africa. But it was really, really interesting. Apparently, there was something he mentioned in the book. The narrator had talked about in the capital, I think he was talking about Kigali, and not the capital of Burundi, which apparently has changed. But I think in both countries there's a considerable, or was a considerable, urban-rural divide. I don't know if there still is. There might be. Which, you know, I'm from the Canadian prairies. I can relate to that. There's a considerable urban-rural divide here too. And the narrator noticed that in the capital, his French was perfectly comprehensible. But in the country, he had a harder time communicating effectively because they would use much older African expressions in French sometimes, but those expressions were not so common in the city, which was more, I don't know, cosmopolitan? I don't know. Anyway, I like country folks. I feel like I am country folk. So, yeah, that was a good book. I'm really glad I read that. At the beginning, I wasn't sure if I would like it, because it took half a second to get into, but oof, it packs a punch by the end. And then I re-listened to, and I'll listen to this again when I get the physical book, because I've ordered the physical book, Moi qui n'ai pas connu les hommes, which is I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Hartman. It's an astonishing book. I read it in English year before last year, I think about a year-ish ago, and was amazed that she could do that. Like, sometimes you just read a book and you're like, that was incredible. How do people do that with language? I don't know. It's very impressive. And it was originally written in French, so I got the French version. I didn't understand most of it because my French is not that good yet. I listened to Jane Eyre earlier, which I mentioned last week, and the only reason I could follow that is because I've read the story several times in English. And the only reason I could follow this at all was because I just read it in the last year or so in English as well. So I listened to it in French, and I've ordered the physical book so that I can listen and read at the same time, and I think that'll help my comprehension as well. It's also a little bit fresher in my memory. Oh, and I got this book, which I haven't started yet. I have so many books on it. Like, my bedside table is hilarious. But this is the Cambridge Companion to the French Novel from 1800 to present, which I'm very excited about because I do want to read more French books this year. I need to practice my French. And then I had a couple of days where I was experimenting. So I have this charcoal paper, which I'd never used before. And this may look like just scribbles. Well, it sort of is just scribbles, but that's okay. I was getting the shapes down of like a couple prairie landscapes from photos that I've got. And trying out this charcoal paper, which is a lot of fun. It's grippier than other paper. Oh, come on, sorry, I'm having navigation issues here. And then I did about 10 of these with, what are they called? Caran d'Ache Neocolor 2s. I love them. And I'm part of an artist's Patreon, and every month she has a different sort of thing we're focusing on, you know, and experimenting with. And this month it's space. So this, whoops, I don't know how to order now. But this basic prairie landscape, which you probably can't identify as a prairie landscape, but I can, because I've been there enough times. I have a range of drawings from really quick and dirty, and like as few lines as possible. And then they get more complicated. Or if you go on the other way, they start out more complex and then get simplified. I didn't do them in this order. I sort of did them in a jumbled up order, just experimenting with different things and responding. Every time I did one, I was working on 2 or 3 at any given time. So that while something was drying, I'd be working on something else. And this is, I think, one of the most busy ones, which you can see is very different from the least busy one. So that was the experiment for the week. And then this was a different prairie landscape with snow and patches of grass and whatnot. And I kind of like that. Oh, and then I tried a portrait with the Neocolor 2s, and it kind of sort of worked out. She's a bit funny looking. And I did her hand many times, so it's very, very purple. Because I had to keep redoing it, because it just kept... The end of the crayon, I mean, you could sharpen it to a point. I didn't. I didn't really want quite that level of detail, but it does mean when you're doing something like eyes or fingers or whatever, you can't, like, it's a bit awkward. Anyway, that's my week. It was very full of books and crayons, which is kind of how I like it. Anyway, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.